Busch Motorsports has announced the 2023 driver lineup, and Kyle Larson is still interested in running the 2023 Indianapolis 500. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. But before I do jump in to talk about all their stories, I do want to continue sending my thoughts and prayers out to the Gibbs family during a very tragic time. Last night, tragedy struck the NASCAR industry as Coy Gibbs unfortunately passed away at the age of 49 years old in his sleep. I know a lot of people have had very negative things to say about the Gibbs family as of recently. I strongly recommend that during this time, you do not say anything disrespectful in the comments to Ty Gibbs and the Gibbs family during this time, and continue to send your thoughts and prayers out to the Gibbs family during this tragic time. My thoughts and prayers continue to go to the Gibbs family during a very tragic time. Be respectful in the comments. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Pala Casino. As it was announced yesterday that Pala Casino is going to be sponsoring Auto Club race in 2023. The race will be called the Pala Casino 400. They're also going to be sponsoring Chris Buescher in that same race in 2023. Really good to see that Pala Casino is jumping up from Live Fast Motorsports to sponsor Chris Buescher in 2023 in that race. I think the paint scheme looks absolutely incredible, better than the Live Fast Motorsports scheme. Also great to see that Pala Casino will be sponsoring the Auto Club race for the final race at Auto Club in the configuration, as they will be converting to the short track in 2024. Really good to see for sure, and glad to see Pala Casino has joined NASCAR. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about 1,000 laps led. Now, for the first time in a very long time, no driver led over 1,000 laps. Chase Elliott led the most laps this season, where he led 857 laps, which is the most of 2022. This is the first time since 1960 that a driver has led less than 1,000 laps and led the most laps in a season. It really shows how much parity there was in the field in 2022. There was a lot of parity, a lot more competition, and a lot of drivers were contending in the 2022 season. A lot of parity, a lot more competition, a lot of guys won. Of course, we had 19 different winners, which ties for the record for most winners in a season. It was definitely very interesting for sure, and crazy that we didn't have a driver lead over 1,000 laps this season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Elliott once again. As it was just reported by Joseph Strigley a few minutes ago that Chase Elliott had the best average finish of the season with a 12.47. That is the worst best average finish in NASCAR history. Every year before this year, a driver's had a better average finish than Chase Elliott. It just shows how much more parity there was in the field and how much more competition there was in the field this year. And again, the field was so competitive this year that a lot of drivers led laps. There was a lot of crash this year with this next-gen car. The unpredictability of this next-gen car really did play a major factor into that. I think it's very interesting for sure, and really crazy to see that the best worst average finish we've ever seen in NASCAR history happened. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jake Drew. As by starting the ARCA West race at Phoenix, the championship race, Jake Drew is the 2022 ARCA West champion. Huge congratulations to Jake Drew. Jake Drew definitely deserves a championship, in my opinion. He was very solid. I think he won 1 or 2 races this year, so he was really good this season. And very happy to see that Jake Drew was able to get it done. I think he absolutely deserves it, in my opinion. Massive congratulations to him on winning the ARCA West Championship. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ty Gibbs. With Ty Gibbs winning the NASCAR Xfinity Series title, he became the first champion in the top 3 series to be born after January 1st, 2000. God, I feel old. I'm only 10 days older than January 1st, by the way, and we got an Xfinity Series champion that is younger than me. Absolutely crazy and absolutely wild that Ty Gibbs already won a championship in Xfinity. He'll likely be going to the Cup Series or driving the number 18 car next year, which I think is very exciting for a lot of people. I mean, congratulations to Ty Gibbs on winning the Xfinity Series title. He deserves it, in my opinion, and crazy to see that he is the youngest driver, one of the youngest drivers ever win a championship for sure. But congratulations to Ty Gibbs on being the first champion to be born after 2000. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Corey Heim. As Corey Heim is the 2022 Camping World Truck Series Rookie of the Year. Well-deserved, in my opinion. Corey Heim won 2 races this season, won at Gateway, and also won at Atlanta to pick up his first career victory in the series as well. I am expecting massive and big things for Corey Heim going into 2023. He'll be driving for Tricon Garage, and I think he will be a legitimate championship contender in 2023. I think it's great to see that he got it done, and congratulations to Corey Heim on winning the Rookie of the Year for the Truck Series. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Xfinity Series. As according to Dustin Albino reports from JSK that the Xfinity Series will have a test at Charlotte on January 30th for a change in the rear skew of the car for the 2023 season. Unsure what kind of skew they're going to be changing it to. I wonder if it'll be a little more inverted. I'm not entirely sure what they're going to be doing, but this test could be very interesting and might change how the Xfinity Series cars race. I really hope whatever changes are coming, though, I really do hope and pray that it does not affect the racing as a whole, because I think the racing this year in Xfinity has been absolutely killer and has been absolutely fantastic. So whatever changes are coming, I hope they don't affect the racing as a whole, but there will be a test happening on January 30th, which I think will be very, very important. In my opinion, I think it will be very, very important. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Mike Harmon Racing. As was announced on Saturday evening, reported by RJ Sardovic, who does some stuff on Instagram, he reports that Mike Harmon Racing has partnered up with Gary Keller for 2023, and it will be called Mike Harmon Racing with Gary Keller. Gary Keller, who's been, I believe, part of the JD Motorsports group for many, many years, with the team for a very, very long time, will now move over to work with Mike Harmon Racing. This is a big upgrade, in my opinion. Gary Keller has been in the industry for many, many years, and part of JD Motorsports for many, many years, and has a lot of experience. Mike Harmon Racing, I expect big things going into next year. Well, not major things. I think the team will be slightly better next year. I think getting an addition of a person like him in the organization, I think that's massive. I think that's really, really huge, and congratulations to them for picking up him next year. I think the team is going to improve heading into 2023, and I expect big things from the team going into 2023. You've got to definitely be really, really excited about that for sure. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to go ahead and talk about TV partners. Now, there's a couple things we're going to talk about from the State of Sport address that happened on Friday. The first thing we're going to talk about is TV partners. Now, according to multiple people who reported this, they said, I believe Steve Phelps said, that there is significant interest from some other TV partners outside of the current TV partners, but they also said that NBC and Fox, in relationship that they have with NASCAR, cannot be better than it currently is. Now, of course, there's a new TV deal that is going to be coming in 2025, and it's unclear if NBC or Fox will be back. There's a lot of talk that NBC could be out at the end of 2024, and ESPN could be replacing it heading into the 2025 season when that new TV contract happens. This is very important, especially when it comes to the future, when it comes to the revenue that's coming out for the teams. We've already seen a lot of discourse when it comes to the revenue at the moment, and a lot of tension going on currently behind the scenes when it comes to that. This will be very, very important. It's unclear at the moment what TV partners will be partnering up. We'll see if Fox NBC does come back, but it's very interesting that it seems like relationship is good, at least with the current TV partners. Who knows, though, at this point, what will happen in the future when it does come to that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about international racing. As I believe it's Steve O'Donnell who said this during the State of Sport address, he reports that international racing at NASCAR is still interested in doing some international racing in the future. Obviously, it's not the first thing they talk about international racing. There have been talks and conversations. There may be racing up in Canada for 2023, but that will not be happening. But they've mentioned Mexico City in the past. They mentioned up in Canada. They mentioned other areas. They mentioned stadium racing. They mentioned a lot of times about international racing. I think there will be international racing in NASCAR in the long-term future. I think NASCAR has goals to do that. I wouldn't be surprised in the future if they do go out to like Wembley Stadium. They go back to Japan and run those exhibition races like they used to do in the past at like Twin Ring Motegi. I think it'd be very crazy to see what they could end up doing in regards to that. But I think it'll be fun to see if they do decide to go with some changes in international racing, because I think international racing is generally really, really important. I think if you want to grow the sport, I think NASCAR going international makes sense. But you, of course, got to work on your car before you do that. So we'll have to definitely wait and see what happens for sure in regards to that. But it sounds like they're definitely talking about maybe doing some international racing in the future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Johnny Sauter. As Johnny Sauter was speaking to Michael Massey from Front Stretch, and Johnny Sauter says he's trying to find some races to do in 2023 and wants to return to the garage and race in 2023. Johnny Sauter has made select starts in the Camping World Truck Series this year. He made one start for Glory to God Racing. He was supposed to run 13 starts, but a team that did not end up going fully through for the season. And Johnny Sauter made about 3 or 4 starts for ThorSport in this past weekend race for Young's Motorsports in their final race. It's unclear what Johnny Sauter's plans are. I think Johnny definitely deserves an opportunity to try to race at least part-time next year and go to a really good organization. Whatever the team decides to go with, who knows at this point. I think Young's would be good for him to bring him on as like someone who could be a good advisor for the team. I think Young's has a lot of work that they really need and capabilities. I think a good team, though, picking him up would be very exciting for sure. But I don't know at this point who will pick up Johnny Sauter heading into 2023. But I hope Johnny Sauter can have an opportunity to race with a good organization heading into 2023. Hopefully, he's able to find a good ride heading the season because I think he deserves an opportunity to have a good ride, in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about aero packages, as this is one of the first things that was talked about at the State of Sport address. Steve O'Donnell mentioned this during the State of Sport address, and he says that NASCAR is looking at road course short track aero changes for 2023. Now, while a lot of people really enjoyed the intermediate racing with the next-gen car, which I agree, the intermediate racing this year was absolutely killer this year, the short track and the flat track racing this year really struggled. And also, of course, the road course this year were not that good this season. To me, there are some changes that need to be made. Obviously, I think maybe reducing the size of the spoiler would probably make a lot of sense. As reduce it maybe to about 2.5 inches would make a lot of sense. But also, to me, increasing the horsepower is what NASCAR needs to do. I think going back to the horsepower that we had in 2021, the one we have with this Gen 6 car, would make a lot more sense for that to do. But NASCAR has said we don't know what they're going to do. They're talking maybe some changes. I think the rear diffuser being taken off would make a lot more sense. I think it would have some changes to make the racing a lot better, and I think it would make the racing a lot better if they did decide to go ahead and do that. So we'll see what aero changes they have coming in the future, but there are some talks, some aero changes coming in the future. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but whatever changes that they're doing can hopefully fix the next-gen car, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kevin Harvick. Now, Kevin Harvick spoke to me this past weekend at the track where the race happened this weekend at Phoenix. And Kevin Harvick says that progress is being made between NASCAR and the drivers, the communication, and the trust between everybody. This is a really good sign, because there has been a lot of tension going on for this year when it comes to the next-gen car. They've had a lot more meetings, and drivers have been at these meetings when it comes to the safety of the next-gen car, and it sounds like these meetings are going a lot better. If you're a fan and you're hearing that, this is a really good sign, and it's really good for the future of NASCAR if we can see everyone come together and be as one. There's been a lot of tension, like I said, going on in the industry, and to see that there is a lot better communication, a lot better trust with the drivers, I think you have to be a really happy fan. If you're a fan of sport, I think you do have to be extremely happy and really happy that the communication at this point is becoming a lot better. And I hope that continues going into the future, and hopefully we see some good things come from that. But it sounds like the things are getting a lot better when it comes to that, and hopefully we do continue heading toward that and things continue to get better, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about charters. Now, this is another thing from the State of Sport address that Steve Phelps talked about. And Steve Phelps says they could extend the charter system and add more charters heading into 2025 when the new agreement comes up. They are talking about continuing the charter system past the 2024 season and continuing for the long term, but the plan is that they could extend the charters and add more teams in it. Now, currently right now there are 36 charters, and people I think are thinking, how many charters would they add? I think there is a possibility they could expand it from 36 to 40, and I think a big reason is there is a lot of interest currently in the charter system, and also talk with the TV deal as well. I think that will play a major factor and a major role into that. So I think that will be very important to watch as well when it comes to the charter system. Obviously, I hope the teams can get a better value for the charter system as well, because I think that's going to be important. But the fact that they are talking about making some changes to the charter system, I think makes a ton of sense, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. But it sounds like there are some changes that could be coming to the charter system in the not so foreseeable future. So So we'll see what happens, but it sounds like things could be changing in the future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Todd Gilliland. Now, as noted during qualifying on the broadcast booth, it was noted by Evan noted that Todd Gilliland is expected to return to Busch Motorsports in 2023. Now, Todd Gilliland spoke to multiple reporters, including Dustin Albino from J-Ski, and he says he has nothing signed currently for 2023. Now, Busch Motorsports is expecting that Todd Gilliland is going to return to the team heading into 2023. And I also would expect that he will return to the team in 2023. There's not a lot of rides currently available to stay in Cup. I mean, he still do have potentially have that second Stewart-Haas racing car, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but it sounds like that he's not in the running for that. I think this is Todd Gilliland's best option, and I think they could really build around Todd Gilliland. I think Todd's a very talented driver, and I think from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, I think that Todd Gilliland has shown a lot of progress and a lot of improvement as a driver this year. So I think that keeping around is going to make a lot of sense. Now, from Motorsports, generally, they wait a long time. They wait till around December to generally announce their plans. They actually, I think, almost announced their plans. I remember about a year or two ago, they announced their plans till January. So I think that there is a possibility we could be waiting a very long time for them to announce that, but they also could announce in the near future during this off season for NASCAR. So definitely have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, but it does sound like they're working on trying to get plans to keep Todd Gilliland with the team, and I do think they are going to keep Todd Gilliland in the organization for 2023, and I've heard that they're going to try to keep him, but we'll have to wait and see, but it sounds like they're going to try to keep him heading into 2023, and I think he will be for sure drive for the team in 2023, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to go ahead and talk about Kyle Busch. Now, we do have a couple of stories to talk about in regards to Kyle Busch, including the first one, which we're going to talk about the Indy 500. Now, we'll talk about the big Kyle Busch Motorsports story at the end, but he was asked by the media about the Indy 500 opportunity. And Kyle Busch said during the media, he says an Indy 500 opportunity pretty much has dried up, and there's really nowhere to go for 2023. So it sounds like Kyle Busch will not be racing in the 2023 Indianapolis 500. Now, they're having a lot of rumors and rumors of Kyle Busch, and he had an opportunity to race Indy 500, but he basically was going to have to be with a competitive Chevy team and wanted to be with a Chevy competitive team. We know that Team Penske was not entering another car in the Indianapolis 500 for 2023. There was a lot of rumblings that he was going to drive a fourth era McLaren SP car, but that opportunity basically fell through. Number one, the colors and the sponsor was going to be Menards, and basically era McLaren SP and Zach Brown don't want the colors basically change on that car. You also have to consider the fact that they wanted someone that was experienced, and they ended up choosing Tony Kanaan to drive that car. And while I think that there are opportunities like Coast Racing as a possibility, or even Dry Ryan Bull Racing, I don't think Kyle Busch wanted to go there. He wanted to go either to Team Penske or McLaren SP, where he could be very, very competitive, because he has to stay with the Chevy brand. It's definitely a very, very big fail for IndyCar to not bring Kyle Busch over for the Indy 500. He's a very talented driver, a very hungry driver going into 2023, and I think it'll make a lot more sense for them to probably try to get him in the car. It's definitely disappointing for sure that he will not be racing in the 2023 Indy 500, but it is what it is, and hopefully in the future, maybe in 2024, if rides do become available, they do get an opportunity, but I do think it's a very, very big flop. They were not able to get Kyle Busch to race in the 2023 Indianapolis 500. Very, very big flop and very, very unfortunate situation in that aspect, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Hailie Deegan. Now, Davey Siegel basically reported before the Truck Series race happened, he reports that Hailie Deegan's plans for 2023 are currently unknown at the moment, but Ford is committed and confident that they will find a ride for her heading into 2023, and they're committed to her heading into 2023 as well. Of course, Hailie Deegan will not be returning to DJR Racing next year, as DJR Racing will be switching to Toyota and will be rebranded to Tricon Garage heading into the 2023 season. Hailie Deegan has had a very up and down tumultuous career. She struggled, of course, in the Truck Series in 2021 and 2022. She did get a top 10 or two top 10s in 2022, but generally she struggled this season. So going to 2023, it sounds like the goal for them is going to try to move her up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series to drive either for Stewart-Haas Racing or SS Green Light Racing. And I think at this point, it will be one of those two rides where she ends up going. Now, of course, they do have to find sponsorship or funding for her, but they will probably likely be able to find those sponsors and that funding so Hailie Deegan can race. Maybe United Rentals jumps up with her. She does have Toter, I think, is sponsored for her. She also does have, I believe, Monster Energy still as a sponsor. She does have other sponsors like Craftsman that I think currently work with her at this particular moment. So I think that will definitely help her get an opportunity. I think that she, like I said, I think she will be driving for SS Greenlight Racing. I don't think she's going to go to Stewart-Haas Racing. I think there's a chance they could have two cars, but also they could bring her in. But I think at this point for Hailie Deegan, I think she will be driving for SS Greenlight Racing next year with a very big technical alliance. I think she needs to be in Xfinity. Trucks is not cutting it for her, and sometimes their driving style isn't as good. Look at Jimmy Johnson, for example. Look at Ty Gibbs, for example. Both drivers that did not race in the Truck Series who just went straight to Xfinity and end up having some really, really great and really, really good performances. So I think Hailie Deegan will be in Xfinity next year, driving the SS Greenlight 07 car, or maybe the 08 car if they do keep Joe Graf Jr. I'm not sure what the plans are for David Starr going into next year at this point, but David Starr is also getting up there in age, so it's very possible that that could be where he ends up she ends up going. So we're going to definitely have to wait and see what happens in regards to that for Hailie Deegan's plans, but it sounds like they're working on them and trying to find her a ride for 2023. Hopefully they are able to find a ride for her so that she can race in 2023. Hopefully she's able to have a good ride for next year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson's comments on Ross Chastain. Now, we do have another Kyle Larson story that we'll talk about here near the end of the episode, but Kyle Larson basically talked about his comments in regards to Ross Chastain. And he basically says, opinion basically currently remains unchanged on the Ross Chastain move. Now, Kyle Larson spoke to the media in regards to the move that Ross Chastain made during the race, and he basically said that that move basically was not racing and basically did not take any skill to make that move. Now, he basically did say and called it badass and said that Ross Chastain, it takes balls to make that move, but basically he continues to say it's unfair and takes no skill. Kyle Larson does have a little bit of a point. I will say that Kyle Larson does have a little bit of a point, but that moment was a huge moment for NASCAR history. And I know that people think wall riding is going to get banned, and NASCAR's talking about that there could be a change coming this offseason, which I completely disagree that they don't need to make a change to it because I think it would make no sense for them to go ahead and change it. I think the move is a move that won't happen ever again. They were talking about during the broadcast, which is like, oh boy, they're talking about it. I think there's going to be a Hail Melon. That's going to happen. But of course, it did not end up happening. And a lot of fans were extremely disappointed that it did not end up happening, especially on social media. I saw some people basically disappointed that Ross Chastain did not try to make a Hail Melon move. But again, Kyle Larson also has tried in the past, so I think he's also a little bit embarrassed at the same time that Ross Chastain was able to succeed. And I think Larson, who tried it back in 2021, which he also did say that he was embarrassed he made the move. So at least he's self-aware that he's embarrassed, and he still feels embarrassed to this day about making that move. But then again, when you have a move that is extremely successful as Ross Chastain's move, I can't blame people. Again, I can't blame Larson for saying what he wants to say. He's got every right to say what he wants. It's his opinion and his decision what he wants to say. But to me, in my opinion, I do personally believe that Larson's a little bit in the wrong, but same token and same time, I can't blame him for basically trying to defend his comments, and I understand where he's coming from. In my opinion, I completely understand where he's coming from. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rev Racing. Now, we do have another story in regards to Kyle Busch Motorsports to talk about at the end of the episode, but we got the other part to talk about, and it's Rev Racing. As Rev Racing is moving up to the Truck Series in 2023, with Nick Sanchez driving the number 2 truck. Gamebridge is going to sponsor them for the whole entire season, and they are going to have a Kyle Busch Motorsports alliance heading into 2023. This is an absolutely fantastic decision. Rev Racing, of course, won the championship with Nick Sanchez and ARCA this past season, and I think this is an absolutely fantastic move for Max Siegel and the organization to finally have an opportunity to jump up to the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series. Not only that, we have a very talented driver who will be driving the number 2 truck. I really do think that this team going into 2023, they are going to be a very, very successful team. I'm expecting big things to the team going into 2023. I think they're going to be better than Kyle Busch Motorsports because you're going to find out who the drivers are here near the end of the episode. But I do think that Rev Racing is going to be a very successful team in their first year. I think they will be contenders for the playoffs. I think Nick Sanchez could win a race or two heading into 2023. Would be not shocked or surprised if that does end up happening, because I think he will be very, very competitive heading into 2023. And I think that there are some big things that are coming. So I'm very excited to see what happens. And again, I cannot wait to see what's going to happen for Rev Racing heading into next year. I think Nick Sanchez is a very talented driver. I would have loved for him to go to KBM in 2023, but I think that this is still a very good move. And at least there's some compensation that they will have. They'll be up in trucks next year. Happy for Rev Racing, by the way, that they are going to be in trucks next year. I cannot wait to see what happens for the team. I'm definitely looking forward to it for sure. And I cannot wait to see that they will be jumping up to the NASCAR Camp World Truck Series next year. I think they'll be playoff contenders, and I'm definitely looking forward to see that Rev Racing will be jumping up to the NASCAR Camp World Truck Series, NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, because remember they're switching to Craftsman next year. Cannot wait for them to jump up to the Craftsman Truck Series in 2023. Really looking forward to that for sure, and excited to see that is going to be happening in 2023. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, is we're talking about Kyle Busch. As yesterday was the final race for Kyle Busch at Joe Gibbs Racing, and it's the end of an era for Kyle Busch at Joe Gibbs Racing. A lot of tribute posts came out from a lot of people who have worked at Joe Gibbs Racing and showed a lot of respect for Kyle Busch over the last couple of days. Of course, there was an M&M's pace car that was out on the racetrack, I think, at one point during the race yesterday, and he had a major tribute to Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch has been the most successful driver in Joe Gibbs Racing history. He won 56 points paid races for the organization, went on to win the Coke 600 in 2018, won a Southern 500 in 2008, won 2 Brickyard 400s, and also won 2 Cup Series championships, and is the most successful driver in Joe Gibbs Racing history. Kyle Busch is getting a member for many years to come from all success he's had at the team. Kyle Busch was also very, very emotional speaking to the media for many, many reasons. I do think a lot of it was due to the passing of Coy Gibbs, but I also think Kyle Busch is very, very emotional as well. The fact that he will not be driving the 18 car, he said it was very hard to look at that 18 car, which really, really hit deep, and I've never have seen Kyle Busch get this emotional before, get this upset before about a situation, in a very, very sad situation. He's leaving, but he will be going to Rich Schultz Racing in 2023, and I think Kyle Busch is going to be very, very hungry to be driving next year at Richard Schultz Racing. I think he's going to be a very, very dangerous driver to be around next year. The talent that Kyle Busch has is absolutely incredible. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people. I do think he's got a really good shot to win a lot of races, and then over the next coming years, I do think he will have a chance in the next few years, because especially how fast that 8 car was with Kyle Reddick, I think he will be a championship threat going into 2023, and I think that Kyle Busch is absolutely going to be a threat heading into 2023. So I'm very excited to see what we're going to see from Kyle Busch heading into 2023. Cannot wait to see what happens. It's a very sad day nonetheless that Kyle Busch is no longer going to be driving for Joe Gibbs Racing heading into the team next year. Looking forward to see what happens, and yeah, definitely really excited for sure to see that Kyle Busch will be basically not driving for the team going into next year. So we'll definitely wait to see what happens in regards to that, and hopefully we'll see what he does with Joe Gibbs Racing, and hopefully he will do great with the team heading in, not Joe Gibbs Racing, but hopefully do great with RCR next season. Now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chase Elliott versus Ross Chastain. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series Championship race, you saw a little bit of controversy on one of the late restarts that happened in this race. Think about 80 or 90 laps ago in this race, there was some contact on the restart. Chase Elliott actually was on the inside, right next, I think, to Joey Logano, had a chance to get the lead in the championship from Joey Logano, who had been dominating the championship in the race. And then, unfortunately, on the restart, you had Ross Chastain there, and Chase Elliott basically came down in front of Ross Chastain and spun out and hit the inside wall. Now, Chase Elliott spoke later to me about that. He basically says he's not really sure what happened in the situation. Alan Gustafson basically assured on the radio that basically that Chase was not at fault for the incident. And Ross Chastain also had a response speaking to media and basically said that he felt like the Chase kind of came down on him. Now, I like a lot of people also are going to have very, very controversial opinions and be bad at Ross Chastain. In this situation, though, that was not on Ross Chastain. That was on Chase Elliott. Ross is not going to back off, especially when you have a championship race. Ross is not backing off. I'm sorry. It's very difficult to pass at Phoenix, and Ross is not going to back off. Chase came down on him. That's on Chase. I understand Chase tried to basically hold on and try to keep position, and basically I know that people think Chastain was going to back off, but when you're going for a championship, you're not going to back off. So to me, in my honest opinion, I think you got to put the blame, unfortunately, on Chase Elliott for that incident. But I also think Chase Elliott really doesn't care at this point because he's not focused on 2023, which I cannot entirely blame him, especially after being mostly the dominant car all year, except in the postseason. They got a lot of stuff to do in the drawing board if they're going to be better during the regular season, in the postseason next year. They got to focus on being better during the postseason next year, despite getting a win. But I do feel like the Chase doesn't ultimately care. I don't think you're going to see anything else come from this going into next year. I think, in my opinion, it was just a racing deal and incident. I put more blame on Chase Elliott, but I think it was just more a racing deal. But I saw a lot of Chase Elliott fans who were blaming Chastain for that. And in my opinion, that was not on Ross Chastain. That, unfortunately, was on Chase Elliott. But that was just my honest opinion. I think that was more on Ross Chastain. Not more on Ross Chastain. I think that was more on Chase Elliott. But I think that's just my opinion. Very frustrating situation regardless. And it sucks that is how it kind of happened. But it is what it is. But I do personally think you got to put more blame on Chase Elliott than Ross Chastain than him on Chase Elliott, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cole Custer. Now, Cole Custer is speaking to media today, and Cole Custer, not today, a couple days ago, and Cole Custer basically talked about what his plans are for 2023 and was asked about the 41 car. And he says that I'll be worried about that after the season is over, which it is over. And he says that's up to Gene and Tony in regards to who will be driving the 41 car in 2023. Obviously, over the last 2 weeks, there's been a lot of rumors since the Charlotte Roval race happened about 4 weeks ago that there's a possibility that Cole Custer may not be driving the 41 car next year, and instead, it might be driven by Ryan Preece next year. Gene wants to keep Cole Custer in the 41 car next year, but Tony wants to put Ryan Preece in the 41 car next year. Now, I will say over the last couple races and the final few races of the year, Cole Custer actually did turn the wick up a little bit and started performing a lot better. Now, that could be due to the crew chief, Mike Shipley, who I thought was a lot better of a crew chief, but honestly, Mike Shipley has been very disappointing in the Cup Series. Tony Cardenay, who I believe was the crew chief for Cole Custer last year races, he did show a lot of signs of improvement, and the 41 car did run a lot better over the last few weeks. That being said, though, Cole Custer has done a very bad job this year in the Cup Series, despite showing some strong signings at the end of the year. He really has struggled. If I had to choose who's going to go in the 41 car personally, because you have to think about the future, because it does sound like Kevin Harvick is going to retire at the end of the 2023 season. It's been indicated, and he's indicated that many, many times over the last few months. He's indicated that next year likely will be the last year for him to drive, and also Almirola's also in the rumblings and maybe retire at the end of next year as well. When you look at Cole Custer in the situation, if I had to choose right now, I am giving the ride to Ryan Preece. Ryan Preece, I think, will be a much more competitive driver. I think he will contend for a postseason and will contend for the playoffs. I think he'll do a lot better as a driver heading into next year if he gets the 41 car. Now, I think a lot of it will come down to Gene's decision, and Gene does have the funding and money. But I also think if we're in Gene's position and in his shoes, I'm going with Tony's decision and putting Ryan Preece in the 41 car. Now, where would I move Cole Custer to? I move into the 15 Rick Ware racing car. Keep him in the Cup Series. I think he deserves to be in Cup, so I don't think he deserves to be out of the Cup Series completely. I think he should, though, be driving the number 15 car for Rick Ware Racing. I think it'd make a lot more sense, but give them full Stewart-Haas racing developed equipment to make him a little more competitive, because Rick Ware has shown signs of improvement, especially over the last 10 to 12 weeks. I think it will be a good team. If you give him full Stewart-Haas racing equipment, I do think it will be very, very competitive. So I think personally, in my opinion, if I had to make a decision and a choice, I'm putting Cole Custer in the 15 car and putting Ryan Preece in the number 41 car. But that's my opinion. I think people disagree, and that's perfectly fine and perfectly honest. I think that's fine. But I think if I was to decide, I put Ryan Preece in the 41 car. That decision is expected to be done sometime at the end of this month. Who will be driving the 41 car? It's been indicated by many reporters, including Bob Pockers, that likely will know who will be driving that car in 2023 in the near future. Well, they'll have to wait and see what happens, but it does sound like there could be decisions coming here in the near future in regards to that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk more about some of the fallout from the Jimmie Johnson news. Now, there's a lot of Jimmie Johnson news we'll talk about, including in the Busch Motorsports report at the end of this episode. But Jimmie Johnson is speaking to the media, and many people have been speaking, and there is a possibility they could add Johnson's name to the organization of Petty GMS Motorsports. Maybe something like Petty GMS Johnson Motorsports, because, of course, it was announced on Friday that Jimmie Johnson will be joining Petty GMS Motorsports as a part owner of the organization heading into 2023, and will also be running a select number of races in the Cup Series in 2023, around 5 to 6 races next season. The plan is for him for sure to run the Daytona 500. Now, it's unclear what the alliance will be heading into 2023. We don't know if it will be aligned with RCR or Hendrick. I think they are going to switch their alliance to Hendrick Motorsports heading into 2023, just because of the fact that with Jimmy's there, I think that they'll have a bigger alliance with Chevy, and I think that they will switch over to the Hendrick Motorsports development group. The third car will be just a car for Jimmie, more likely not a surprise unless we do see someone from like the Xfinity Series size to jump up, but I would think more than likely we will see that third car just be a car for Jimmie Johnson. Now, another thing to note is that there is some talk that they could switch the number to 48 for the third car and maybe switch the number for Bowman next year, maybe back to 88 or give the 25. But I think there's a chance that that might have just been a joke. I don't think the 48 will go over to Petty GMS. I think the 48 will still be a Hendrick number. I would think the number will likely be 44 for Jimmie Johnson, just because that number has been a very big allotted number with the brand of Petty. I know the 48s haven't been numbered with Jimmie Johnson, but I would think the 48 will stay with Hendrick, and I think they'll choose the number 44 for Jimmie Johnson. Another thing to note is that Jimmie Johnson says he's interested in doing sports car racing, including, and he's been cleared to run Le Mans 24 hours, so he's been cleared to run the Garage 56 entry, so it's likely he will do that. He's also talked about maybe doing the Chili Bowl next year, and he has talked about doing the Indy 500, but it sounds like that with him being a part owner of Petty GMS, it sounds like it's becoming less and less likely that they will have him driving in the Indy 500 next year. If I had to talk about some races he could do, there's talk he could do the Chili Bowl. I think he will do the Chili Bowl next year. I think there's a good chance he could. And I think it'd be fun for Jimmie to do a lot of different races. The Rolex 24 Action Express Racing, that 48 Cadillac could still be a car that comes back, but there's talk at Action Express also may not have a car next year. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see what races Jimmie Johnson does race outside of NASCAR, what races he'll race in NASCAR. We know he's going to run the Daytona 500. He does want to run North Wilkesboro. There's also talk we don't know about his Hall of Fame eligibility, though. I don't think it's going to get delayed. I think he gets inducted in 2024, and that will happen. I think he will get inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. But in all seriousness, in all honesty, I think it's just really cool to see that Jimmie is coming back to race next year, and it's great that he's becoming a part owner of the organization. I think it's a huge story for the sport, one of the biggest stories and one of the bigger stories for sure of the silly season so far. For Jimmie to come back racing and add an addition, it'll be very cool if him and Julio Castroneves are the two guys battling for the final spots, because I think Castroneves will run the Daytona 500. I think we're going to see a lot of guys entering the 500. I think you're going to see around 44 to 46 cars entering the Daytona 500, because you do have a talk of maybe MBM running a car or two next year for the Daytona 500. What about Gaunt Brothers? We haven't seen them in a year. What if they decide to come back? Who knows at this point, but it does sound like at this point that we'll see what happens to Jimmie Johnson, but there's been a lot of fallout from Jimmie Johnson. We've got one more little indication we'll talk about at the end of this episode. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson was also speaking to media on Friday evening before they did go out for practice. And basically, he says that nothing has moved forward when it regards to running the Indianapolis 500. But he still wants to race in the 2023 Indianapolis 500. But he also knows at this particular point that he heard about the Kyle Busch news, and he said it's very, very unfortunate, and that could be a major, major factor. Rides are starting to fill up for the Indianapolis 500, but it seems like he could potentially be the only driver from NASCAR that might be racing the double next year. There is still talk that they're working on a ride potentially for Kyle Larson, but some of those rides are filling up. We do know at this point that Team Penske will only have 3 cars in the Indianapolis 500 in 2023. They will not have a 4th car for a NASCAR Cup Series driver to run. I know that Roger Penske has indicated that they will have at points wanted Kyle Larson to run the Indy 500, but he had had not been approved, because he is approved to run the 2023 Indianapolis 500, but right now we don't know if he will be approved to go ahead and race in that. Now, another big thing to note from that fallout, and basically kind of to know from it, is that we already know that Aaron McLaren SP got their fourth driver. There have been talk he could have drove for Aaron McLaren SP, but that is off the table at this point, as that will be driven by Tony Kanaan. Now, right now, what rides could Kyle Larson run? Because he's probably not going to get approved to run the Honda. He could run the Honda with Chip Ganassi, Bubble Chevy, let him run. I don't think so, and I think Chip Ganassi will likely have a full-time guy, maybe like Kimi Räikkönen perhaps drives that ride. I think there's a possibility of an option he could go with. I think someone noted this on our YouTube channel. Dry Ryan Bull Racing. There's rumors and rumors that Sage Karam is probably not going to run the 2023 Indianapolis 500. There's talk that he may not run the Indy 500 next year. That would be a really good option for Kyle Larson to run. And there's talk he could be driving for Dry Ryan Bull Racing in the Indy 500. I think that would be a really good organization to go to. I think Dry Ryan Bull Racing would actually be a pretty competitive team. We saw what Sage Karam has done with the team in the past, and we also saw what Santino Ferrucci did in the Indy 500. He was very competitive. And I think if you're going to have a big headlining story of a driver running the Indy 500, Kyle Larson is definitely the perfect guy to go with. It would make a lot of sense for the team. I think they'd be very, very competitive if they brought Kyle Larson on to be a race car driver for their organization, and I think it would make a ton of sense for them to be there and be in that ride. So we'll see where Kyle Larson ends up running in the 2023 Indianapolis 500. I think if he does run, I think it will be a Dry Ryan Bull Racing. Maybe Hendrick supports him, and maybe he runs the 24 car, which, very interestingly, that 24 font is the same as a Hendrick font. So it would make a lot of sense for Larson to race in the Indianapolis 500. I think it would make a lot of sense for them to try to get him to run the Indy 500, but again, he knows he wants to be in a very competitive car. Competitive rides are filling up, and there's not a lot of rides left available. There's a lot of talk there may not be many entries over 33. There might be only one car that is going home for the Indy 500, and he's going to want to be in a very competitive ride. Larson, as he has publicly said that many, many times about the Indy 500, that he wants to be in running that. So we'll see what Kyle Larson does in regards. I think he has a chance to run the Indy 500. He's interested for sure in running the Indy 500. We'll have to see if he does get confirmed to run the Indy 500 maybe in 2023. We'll see what happens, but hope he's able, if he does get to run it, hope he's able to find a ride and gets an opportunity to race in it. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch Motorsports. Now, Kyle Busch Motorsports announced their 2023 driver lineup on Friday afternoon. And honestly, it's a pretty questionable driver lineup. So there are only going to be 2 trucks next year. That 18 truck will not be returning in 2023, as that is a Toyota-based number, and it's a Joe Gibbs-based number. They will not be returning in 2023. So, their 2023 driver lineup. The driver of the Ford truck is going to be Chase Purdy, who of course left Vittori Racing at the end of this year. He'll be driving the number 4 for them full-time next year. Unclear what sponsorship and funding it is. We'll probably know about that in the near future. They also will have Jack Wood driving the number 51 truck for a majority of the season next year. There will be no ARCA program next year. Kyle Busch is expected he'll run 5 races heading into 2023, and there will be an all-star cast of drivers who will be driving for the team. Let's talk about this lineup for some of the drivers in the team. We'll talk about another all-star driver who could be driving for the team. Let's first begin with Chase Purdy. I'm going to be frank and honest. Chase Purdy had a pretty disappointing year. I will say he did improve in 2022 from where he was in 2021, as I think his truck was better this year than it was last year, but he still was really, really bad. And you're in a championship caliber ride, and you're expected to do really good and be a championship threat, and he was not that championship threat that you were expected to be. So that was very, very disappointing to see, and very, very hard to see that he did not perform up to level. Tyler Ankrum was way better, and I'm not expecting much from him. Now, maybe I could be wrong, and he does better with Chevy branded stuff, which I think could be a possibility, but I was not impressed with Chase Purdy. Then you get to Jack Wood. Jack Wood was not good at all this year. There were times with GMS this season where he ran outside the top 20 in winning caliber equipment. Grant Enfinger made the round of 8 and had a chance to make it to the championship 4. Jack Wood ran in the back. Now, he's not running the full season because of the fact he's not a guy who comes from sponsorship or funding. But he has absolutely struggled in his Truck Series career. He wasn't great in ARCA either, so he's not the greatest driver in the world. So I am not expecting much from Jack Wood going into 2023. And honestly, KBM, outside of the All-Star guys, I'm not expecting much from KBM going into next year. Now, I don't think they're going to completely suck, but I don't think the KBM will be a championship caliber team. Now, the 51 truck might be a championship caliber car when they have the All-Star guys in it, but I don't think they're going to be a team competitive. I think Rev Racing is going to be better next year, and I do think that GMS will be better next year. I'm not expecting much. I understand what KBM went with Chase Purdy, though. Chase Purdy's got funding and sponsorship. I understand why they went with him. I just think it's very frustrating they couldn't go with someone like a Nick Sanchez or Roger Kroof, but Roger Kroof sounds like may have somewhere he'll be going for anyways next year in 2023. Jack Wood's also been horrendous, and I just have not been impressed. Now, there is some positive out of KBM, as like I mentioned, Kyle Busch Motorsports. For Kyle Busch, he'll run 5 races. There are going to be other drivers from Xfinity and Cup who are going to run. So who are some of these drivers who are going to run? I would think Austin Dillon has a possibility. He is, of course, a teammate of Kyle Busch. I think he'll have a chance of maybe making a select start or two. I also think that Chandler Smith will probably make at least a couple starts with the team next year and still be part of Kyle Busch Motorsports with the Chevy brand, since he'll be driving for Kaulig Racing, which has an affiliation with Richard Childress Racing. I think there's a possibility of that going down. I also would not be surprised if you see a driver like Austin Hill make a start with the team and maybe some other guys get an opportunity in the development program. But there's a driver who could also be running that I think was a very big shock. Kyle Busch mentioned during the press conference that Jimmie Johnson could be driving the number 51 truck in at least one race next year, which I think the cat's out of the bag. He sounds like Jimmy's going to run a race with the team next year. Now, obviously, when it does come to Jimmie Johnson running it, he has made a truck series start in the past. He drove the number 81 for Randy Moss Motorsports, or the Moss Motorsports team, back in 2008. Led some laps, but ended up crashing out of the race while contending, I believe, for the race lead. So that was very, very disappointing to see. He was up front contending. It was really, really fast. The race ended up crashing out in an 81 truck that had Hendrick affiliation as well. Jimmy, I'm not sure how competitive he'll be in the truck series, but I think it would make a ton of sense and perfect sense if he ran at North Wilkesboro, the legendary track. Jimmie Johnson, of course, wants to run at North Wilkesboro, and I think it'd make a lot of sense for him to run that 51 truck at North Wilkesboro, the really big legendary track. But going back to KBM, again, just very frustrating to see that is a lineup that they're going to have in 2023. They're not going to be a championship caliber team with both the drivers running majority of the year. I expect that they will be an outside playoff contending team. But man, oh man, oh man, I look at this lineup and it's really, really frustrating to see. I understand what Kyle was trying to do, but at the same token, at the same time, I do find it very, very frustrating they decided to go ahead with these two guys, and they could have gone with other drivers. You have other drivers in your arsenal. Parker Kligerman or Kyle Weatherman, perhaps, would have been a great option to go with. I think Kyle Weatherman would have been a fantastic choice, but I think there's a chance he'd be driving with Jesse Wuji's team full-time next year. But it is what it is. Hopefully they can perform next year. But I'll be honest, I'm not expecting much from both these guys heading into 2023. I'm just going to be perfectly honest with everybody. So that is your today's Long NASCAR and Motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on, to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Link description below over that, and combo your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts about Kyle Busch Motorsports' 2023 driver lineup? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the stories we discussed here today on today's episode? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, we're going to be ranking every single NASCAR Cup Series race, every single points-paying NASCAR Cup Series race. That will be up on the channel tomorrow morning, maybe a little bit later as I got to go vote. And then on Wednesday, there should be a NASCAR news video on some NASCAR news, but we'll have to wait and see how much news gets released since I'm not expecting much this week. Thursday will likely be a Tyler Reddick-based video, and we've got a lot of content coming out during the winter as well as we get you guys closer to Thanksgiving. Thank you guys for supporting the content. We got a lot of content on the way. I'll see you guys there for some more great content on the channel. Take care, everybody.